innovativ,
holistic,
Ästhetika,
free thinking,
chaotisch,
honest,
revolutionary,
white,
radikal,
fast,
German.
That is Bauhaus.
After 100 years, the ideals of the Bauhaus are more relevant today than they were then.
100 years ago, Bauhaus reimagined the future.
How will we learn? How will we live?
The Bauhaus influence is everywhere.
Bauhaus set out to formulate a language of design that was universal.
That everything has an ideal height, an ideal size, and that's what optimizes its utility.
You know, they wanted to kind of bridge the gap from whether you're a craftsman or whether you're a designer or whether you're an artist.
Bauhaus is a legend. The brilliance of the Bauhaus school remains undiminished even today. Even though its existence was short-lived, it continues to shape the world we live in. New approaches to education and training, architecture, painting, dance and design were explored and developed here. When Hitler seized power and forced the school to shut down, its artists, architects and visionaries emigrated, fanning out and spreading the Bauhaus doctrine around the world. What became of the Bauhaus Utopia and the principle that good design can improve people's lives? In the early 1960s, Walter Gropius drew up plans for a large housing estate on the outskirts of Berlin. Modern urban planning would tackle the housing shortage. Nearly all the new homes were earmarked for low-income families. 30 years after the closure of the Bauhaus, the project sought to put the school's vision into action, a better life for many people.
Moving to the Gropiusstadt was a dream.
It was sheer luxury.
A heated apartment with a bathroom and everything.
Running hot water.
Unbelievable. I still love the Gropiusstadt.
Jutta Weisbecker and Hans-Georg Mietke moved into the Gropiusstadt as soon as it was completed.
I got married in 1969 and there were no apartments to be had anywhere. Nowadays, things are easy in comparison. Housing was desperately needed back then.
I also moved here in 1969. I'd sent off 29 applications for apartments. I got 4 offers, including this place. I didn't have a car, but I knew there was an underground stop here, so I took the offer here.
In the late 1950s and early 1960s, solutions to the housing crisis became more ambitious. Gropius and his architecture firm, Tech, the Architects Collaborative, were tasked with drawing up a master plan.
Even before the war, the rear courtyard buildings of many tenement blocks in Berlin had been torn down to make the apartments in the front lighter and airier. New housing projects were to be built in the city's greener outskirts.
The idea of huge urban estates had already been explored on paper as a utopian vision by architects in the 1920s.
Gropius's vision of an urban utopia was defeated by circumstances beyond his control. In 1961, communist East Germany built the Berlin Wall, dividing the city in two and exacerbating the housing shortage. Gropius originally planned residential blocks with 14,500 apartments and a maximum of 14 floors. In the end, there were 19,000 apartments and up to 30 floors. Gropius's original vision ended up massively compromised.
He didn't want just patches of green. He wanted a landscape with green flowing spaces between the buildings. In his vision, nature wasn't contained. It was an integral part of the new estate.
By this point, Walter Gropius had long been living in the US.
Gropius didn't have much time. He could only be reached by phone. Now and then he paid a visit, maybe 3 times a year or so. He was never in charge of the project. He was more of a consultant, the godfather of the plan.
Gropius came to Berlin when the foundation stone was laid. But he wasn't involved with the construction, and there was nothing he could do about the final result.
Gropius did everything in his power to prevent his name being attached to the project. He was deeply unhappy about it. There's no doubt about it. After his death, the whole complex was named after him, which must have made him turn in his grave.
By the 1980s, Gropiusstadt had gained a reputation as a troubled neighborhood. A run-down concrete jungle with new tenants coming and going all the time, and lots of derelict apartments. The Gropiusstadt frequently hit the headlines as a crime hotspot. But to Jutta Weisbecker and Hans-Georg Mietke, it was home.
People were happy here and didn't understand what all the bad headlines were about. We didn't see it like that at all. We lived here with our children and we liked it.
Today, Gropiusstadt is once again popular with families. The area is getting spruced up thanks to renovation work and community outreach projects. This utopian vision of urban life is still a work in progress. Elsewhere in the world, utopias are further out of reach. In Latin America's major cities, there's a lot of room for improvement in housing and infrastructure. Many urban planners there would agree with the Bauhaus principle that architects bear a social responsibility.
Ultimately, our work as architects and urban planners is about people.
People matter to Carolina Saldarriaga, an urban planner from Medellin, Colombia, a city where infrastructure problems have long loomed large. Traffic clogs the streets and sprawling favelas define the cityscape. It's nearly impossible for buses to pass through these narrow, steep streets. But then the city had an idea. Today, 6 outdoor escalators extend 384 meters up the hillside. Now, the 140,000 residents of Comuna 13, one of the city's poorest neighborhoods, no longer need to make the climb by foot. Jaco Castano is well aware of how the escalators have affected the district.
I'm 33 and I've lived here all my life, with my mother, sister, and son.
The escalators are a major tourist attraction, a bonus for locals like Jaco, a rapper who gives guided tours of the area's best graffiti. In the past, few visitors would have dared to venture into Comuna 13, reputed to be the most dangerous neighborhood of what's often called the world's most dangerous city.
Many friends of mine lost their lives, many neighbors. Lots of people just disappeared. It happened a lot around here.
Improving people's lives. This was the vision of Bauhaus. Today, that vision also encompasses infrastructure projects like these outdoor escalators.
The escalators themselves aren't even the point. The point is what they've unleashed in people, a sense of community. They've created a sense of belonging, of happiness and pride in the neighborhood. More than 30 families with small shops live near the escalators. So, thanks to the escalators, local businesses are doing much better.
Hola, doña Consuelo. Hola, ¿cómo estás? ¿Cómo ha estado? ¿Bien o no? Muy bien, ¿y usted, mijo?
These days, Consuelo Garcia's shop is thriving. Times used to be tougher.
Getting around used to be much harder.
It was very hard, terrible.
The roads weren't paved?
No, they weren't.
We had streets of mud.
Mud, that's right.
But there were lots of houses here back then, weren't there?
Yes, many were made of wood.
Wooden ones, that's right.
There was a narrow path, a steep slope. Sometimes there'd be water gushing down it.
It was a narrow, sunken footpath.
The escalators and the cable cars on the other side of the city that connect it to the favelas have attracted international attention. In 2013, Medellin was named the world's most innovative city.
Sure, it's a beautiful city, very photogenic, very friendly. But there's more than one narrative of what's happened here. These infrastructure projects were designed to improve public transport, like the cable cars. But the ulterior motive was to sell the city. The city has rebranded itself.
In doing so, it hasn't always put its residents' needs front and centre. A further cable car line is under development. This, together with other infrastructure projects, has put some 600 families at risk of losing their homes.
Is this a city for tourists or for those who live here?
Urban planners like Carolina Saldarriaga do what they can to ensure it's for the people who live there. Mexico embraced many of the ideas first explored at the Bauhaus as early as the 1920s. And then, in 1939, former Bauhaus director Hannes Meyer received an invitation. He became head of the new Institute for Urban Planning in Mexico City.
There aren't many buildings by Meyer. He spent 10 years in Mexico, but we don't have a single one.
Nevertheless, Hannes Meyer influenced an entire generation of Mexican architects.
I can say with absolute certainty that Bauhaus had a huge influence on many Mexican architects. Mario Pani, for example. And Pani has been a major influence on me. I'm sure that Hannes Meyer had a big effect on him.
Architect Tatiana Bilbao is interested in social housing.
The housing
situation in Mexico is very difficult. There's a huge demand for housing. And the housing that is available is poor quality, very run down.
She wants to build affordable housing that does more than just meet minimum government standards.
I'm interested in the structure. My idea was to design the structure for a house that could be extended to become larger than 43 square meters, because that's just too small. We wanted a flexible design that could respond to different needs and climate conditions, one that's expandable.
She's designed a flexible prototype for a house that can be easily reproduced, much like Hannes Meyer's Laubengang houses in Dessau. It's intended for the very poorest members of Mexican society and is subsidized by the government. The most affordable version costs just $8,000. The core of each house is made of concrete block. The innovation is that this can be expanded with flexible modules. The population of Mexico is growing rapidly. Inspired by the utopian vision of the Bauhaus, Tatiana Bilbao's well-designed homes are a progressive and creative solution to the country's housing shortage.
Maybe it's a naive dream, the idea that architects have the potential to make a difference. But I believe we do. To me, Bauhaus is a vision of the future. It demonstrated what architects can do to help people. It's in that respect that I identify most with the movement.
Hannes Meyer spent 10 years in Mexico, at a time when its left-wing government was introducing sweeping social reforms.
Many architects here insisted that architecture was an art form. They were resistant to Hannes Meyer's highly rationalist approach. So what did Meyer accomplish? He planned to build units on every corner. And yet, we don't have a single building here in Mexico City that he actually designed. But we do have many buildings that are a testament to his influence.
Former Bauhaus teachers Josef and Anni Albers also helped Bauhaus ideas spread across Latin and South America. The couple traveled extensively through Mexico, Cuba, Peru, and Chile, frequently guest teaching. Anni Albers fell in love with Mexican weaving techniques and traditional South American textiles. Back at Black Mountain College, she passed on to her students what she'd learnt. Mexican artist Amor Munoz cites Anni Albers' textiles and prints as a major influence on her work. On the Yucatan Peninsula, she founded Yuca Tech, a social project for Mayan women that marries tech and tradition. These seamstresses used to work in a textiles factory that closed down. They've now found new ways to use their skills.
This project is collaborative and participatory. The basic aim is to apply the do-it-yourself spirit to traditional crafting and the maker movement, closing the gap between artisanal creativity and technology. All the pieces they're making here, this panel and the electrical sombrero hat, it all works with rechargeable batteries.
The solar panels are connected to each other using conductive steel thread, forming an electrical circuit. The women combine the conductive thread with henequen, a type of agave that grows in the Yucatan Peninsula. Once a solar panel has charged for about 5 hours during the daytime, it can provide enough light for 2 nights.
It's really useful at night when it's pitch dark in my village. It's on all night, and it's so useful when I need to go to the toilet or hear a strange noise. It's a bright light. It's very useful.
Amor encourages the women to feel proud of their skills and to find creative ways of using them.
How does your husband feel about you understanding how solar power and LEDs work and what a battery is? What you've learned are the basic principles of engineering, even if you don't realize it.
It's a great advantage for me. What I've learned and made will help me in the future.
Working with new materials and products is providing these women with a new livelihood.
We're thinking of making new products and taking them to market so people can buy them.
These days, not much traditional henequen is grown in the Yucatan region. The market is dominated by imported synthetic fiber from China.
Technology can be used to ensure that old-fashioned skills aren't forgotten. It can help keep a craft and a tradition alive. So why not use it?
Amor Munoz has found a way of fusing technology and textiles to secure a professional future for Mayan craftswomen. She was partly inspired by the work of Bauhaus artist Anni Albers.
When Anni Albers first arrived at Black Mountain College, she had to adjust to the circumstances. There were few materials to work with, for example. So she began using natural materials like pasture grass, shrubs, eucalyptus, and jute. She'd weave them together with industrial materials, just as we did with Yucatec.
Everyday design that's a hybrid of handmade and high-tech. Is this the utopian vision of the Bauhaus in action?
There's a strong Bauhaus influence in many parts of Latin America, a strong connection. You see it with a little utopia like this one here, these little social experiments. It may be small scale, but it's exactly what they were aiming for when they established the Bauhaus.
Ultimately, you don't see the influence of Bauhaus in actual products anymore. A lot of time has passed. 100 years, that's a long time. But its philosophy is entrenched in the way designers are taught and trained. Bauhaus is always the starting point.
Bauhaus was a movement, but it was first and foremost a school. Its goal was to foster a new generation for a new beginning. Education was of paramount importance. The inauguration of the new campus of the German school in Madrid. Students and professional dancers are exploring the premises, experiencing space through movement, an idea that also has roots in the Bauhaus theatre and dance workshops.
The school's architecture is very striking. It makes a statement. It says loudly and clearly, this is the German school, this is our identity. The minute I entered and saw how open it was, I was won over. It's unbounded. The architecture expresses the open-minded identity of the school.
At the Bauhaus, the transparency of the architecture was coupled with a fresh, open-minded approach to education. Here, that's signalled by exposed concrete, glass and aluminium. The buildings each frame an inner courtyard. Together, they form a honeycomb, with niches for students to gather in. The skylights create a play of light and shade.
There are several key factors in the architectural concept. One that's very important to us as a school is that it expresses how the separate structures form an ensemble, a community connected by the courtyards.
Large classroom windows overlook the surrounding landscape.
We are, of course, very fortunate to have such a beautiful natural environment. The greenery, the colors, it creates a peace and quiet, a sense of longevity, all of which is conducive to learning.
Gelassenheit und auch Perspektiven, die längerfristig sind.
Today's society calls for new approaches to learning, which architecture can help consolidate.
The architectural forms of the building clearly have a structural, aesthetic and artistic value. But to us it also has a very pragmatic value. Our art teachers use it as reference for lots of sketching and creative work with the students. So it's also a source of inspiration. This shows how meaningful buildings can be and how the building helps students identify with their school.
How do we want to live in the future? This was the central question posed by the Bauhaus. 100 years later, it's one that's still being posed. Here, for example. Chicago, birthplace of the skyscraper, a city that's always drawn architects from all over the world. The Iit Institute of Design was founded in 1937 as the new Bauhaus, taking up the mantle from the German school. Today it focuses on what's called human-centered design, an approach that has little to do with architecture or furniture. Instead, it seeks to shape people's lived reality. One focus of research is a project called Recovery Park in Detroit, Michigan. There are more abandoned lots in the inner city here than anywhere else in the US. With the collapse of the auto industry in Detroit, the city went into decline. Unemployment is rife. In 2013, the city of Detroit filed for bankruptcy.
Detroit has lost 2/3 of its population, so we've gone from a city of close to 2 million people to a city just hovering around 600,000. We've done a lot of work with design thinking people, IIT out of Chicago, to really think about how to use land effectively, how to rebuild infrastructure in a different kind of way, how to create the jobs.
Garry Wozniak is a former drug addict. He spent time in jail and after he was released, struggled to find work. His personal experience drove him to set up Recovery Park. It's an urban agricultural initiative that uses vacant land and provides jobs for over 20 people.
Our social mission is to create jobs for people with barriers to employment. So people coming out of prison, people struggling with, disease of addiction, people with literacy issues, homelessness issues, chronic unemployment issues. We provide 100% health care for our employees. We make sure that people have housing, we make sure that they have transportation, we make sure they have clothing, make sure they have food in their cupboard at home. We provide all those things.
These people not only work here, they can also learn a trade. An evolution of the Bauhaus ethos. Design has gone social. Kevin Harrison is training as a gardener.
It's gratifying to see something grow and then goes off to stores and then feeds people. And it's just beautiful. I love what I do when I'm doing it. It really is. Because it's like life. Start from a seed and then we blossom into, people. And it's just beautiful.
For Garry Wozniak, Recovery Park is more than a job creation scheme for the socially and economically disadvantaged. The enterprise's urban farm currently supplies 133 restaurants. He hopes that Recovery Park will one day be the biggest urban agriculture business in the US.
I still want to be the Motor City because that's given us a worldwide brand, but I also want to be known as a food city. I also want to be known as a social impact city.
The social impact of architecture is also a central concern of Berlin-based architect Jürgen Meyer. His experimental utopias push the boundaries of what architecture can do, often transgressing them.
Architecture today is confronted with a challenge. Design, planning, has to be innovative on several fronts. First, of course, in terms of construction. New materials and methods have paved the way for very different types of architecture. In Seville, for example, we built something with laminated timber and a polyurethane coating that's now the biggest wood construction in the world.
The Metropole Parasol in Seville, Spain, has a maximum width of 150 meters. Over 3,000 wooden parts are held together with glue. Initially, there were doubts it would work. The high-performing glue is a technical innovation. The architect wants to expand the boundaries of the possible. His organic design has breathed new life into Seville's Old Quarter. Jürgen Meyer has been called Germany's greatest architectural hope since Bauhaus. His designs would have been technologically unfeasible in Bauhaus days. Using 3D modeling, he can incorporate prefabricated elements without forfeiting aesthetic value. He's currently working on a building for a university in Berlin.
Our building is very sculptural and made of infra-lightweight concrete. It contains foam, glass, gravel, and clay aggregate to improve the concrete's insulation capacity. So we'll have a fossil-free facade without polystyrene and additional insulation. It'll be a very low-maintenance building.
At the Bauhaus, Gropius also experimented with new forms and materials. If he was still designing buildings, perhaps they would look like Jürgen Meyer-Haas, sculptural but also practical. The Bauhaus era is a thing of the past, as is the flurry of reconstruction and the abundance that marked the post-war years in the West. Today's design experts must address the explosion of urban populations and the shortage of housing in times of dwindling resources.
Bauhaus was very interested in sustainability, in being economical with resources and materials. We shouldn't forget that this was an era of rampant poverty. Bauhaus never had any funds, and the students had to be very thoughtful with the materials they worked with.
Thinking small. That's at the heart of a social experiment underway on the grounds of the Bauhaus Archive in Berlin, the Tiny House University. The project's initiator is German architect Van Boele-Menzel.
100 years ago, Bauhaus reimagined the future at a time when the system was changing from a monarchy to a democracy. Back then, no one knew exactly what democracy would look like, what equal rights for all would look like, what a home would look like if everyone had a right to their own kitchen filled with light and with a balcony. What would a society in which everyone had access to education actually look like?
Today, people are once again rethinking architecture and education from the ground up.
This
is where people can experiment. The question they'll be investigating is, how can we revolutionize architecture and learning? It starts with small questions. For example, how can we use space without owning it? That's where the idea of the tiny house comes in, one which I find very charming. A tiny house on wheels. If it's on wheels and has a number plate, it has the legal status of a car, and a car doesn't need its own piece of land. The space is 6.4 square meters. That's not much at all. But when you look around, it feels generous. There are really high windows, and the ceilings are 3.6 meters high.
Is it time we re-evaluated our standards? Could we learn to live in less than 7 square meters? We could solve a lot of problems by downsizing.
This is the closet. This is the bathroom. This is the toilet, a composting toilet, and this is the shower.
The modest wooden house is the result of an ambitious idea, an affordable, flexible and democratic living solution, a house for digital nomads, for people who don't need or want to be tied down. They could set up home anywhere, even a campsite. The modular tiny houses are mobile, recyclable and easy to assemble.
The tiny house is a movement. We're working for the good of society, looking for answers to urgent problems such as hunger, access to water, energy, migration. Those won't be solved on a campsite.
The world's population is expected to reach 10 billion by 2050. New living solutions are urgently called for.
The idea that we need to own as much as possible is buried very deep inside us. Sell, sell, want, don't ask questions. We've been doing that for 100 years. Now we need a rethink. We need to ask ourselves if constant consumption is doing us any good. Don't consume, construct. That's my motto.
When every inch of the Earth has been built on, will we need to find a new planet to colonize?
Interestingly, to get to Mars, the moon would be a stopping point. So the moon makes Mars possible.
Sir Norman Foster, one of the world's leading architects, has already started exploring new frontiers.
I've always been fascinated by space, by flight, by aircraft, lunar travel. The Mars project with NASA grew out of a lunar project with the European Space Agency. Essentially, you take robots out to Mars, and the robots mix with an additive the dust, the red dust of Mars. And the robots, learning from the bone structure of animals and humans, create a shell with the dust which is mixed with the additive, which is over an inflatable structure.
Foster's settlement would be built with the materials found on the surface of Mars. Transporting steel girders and concrete blocks into space obviously isn't an option.
Well, of course, that is science fiction. So the things that I dreamt about and read about as a young person are now reality. But I think that the whole space thing is, in a way, perhaps like the tallest building. It's like the medieval cathedrals that reach for the heavens. I think it's human nature. I think it's always striving, trying to break boundaries, trying to stretch the limits of human ingenuity, to defy gravity.
Bauhaus was all about visions of the future, charting new ground and trusting in technology. Today's world is global, digital, virtual, and high-tech. Colonizing other planets no longer sounds like such a crazy idea. But do we really want to return to life in an underground cave as our future?
I think that the future of our planet is about our planet.
To first bring our own house in order and return our focus to the needs of the many, perhaps Bauhaus still has a lot to teach us.
I think after 100 years, the ideals of the Bauhaus are more relevant today than they were then. We need design ingenuity to tackle the big issues of our time. Rapid urbanization, pollution, climate change. So essentially, you're talking about the world out there of streets, parks, bridges, public transport. All of that is design. The Bauhaus was about design. So it was a very optimistic, a very utopian, but down-to-earth view of design in the broadest sense. I'd like to think that what we do today as architects, as designers, as urbanists, is about the quality of the life, and a passionate belief that if you improve that quality, the quality of design will improve the quality of your life.
An idea that began with Bauhaus. No one knows what tomorrow's world will look like, but design will shape it and sustain it.
If the only constant is change, then design is going to go on for as long as human beings inhabit the planet and beyond the planet.